I didn't come back to forgive. I came back to witness. And to end it. The will reading took place in a law office so quiet you could hear every heartbeat struggling to stay calm. I, Ivy McConnell, the daughter erased from the family line, stood face to face with my birth mother, the woman who once declared me dead for refusing to live the life she scripted. The lawyer opened the folder. Read every line. One by one, the assets were transferred to me. Bank accounts, biotech company shares, 4 properties, and $82 million. My mother, former Senator Karen McConnell, didn't say a word. She simply stepped forward, ripped the inheritance certificate from the lawyer's hand, and tore it to shreds in front of everyone. Then she looked at me coldly. You think one little will gives you everything? No, Ivy. I erased you from this world a long time ago. Oh. But what she didn't know, this was just the beginning. Because that document? It was bait. The real one is still with me. Along with video footage, passwords, banking records, and a chain of evidence that could burn down every piece of the empire they stole. They thought they buried me with a death certificate. But they forgot something. I'm the only one Grandpa trusted. And I didn't come back to make peace. I came back to take everything. Don't take your eyes off this story, because what's coming next, there won't be a second chance. I arrived in Charleston at 5 a.m., when the sky was still a cold gray and mist clung to the taxi windows. My hometown looked exactly the same after all these years, the same damp cobblestone streets, the same salty breeze blowing through the old alleys. But I wasn't the same. I didn't bring a big suitcase, just a canvas bag with medical records from the Uganda clinic, a few copies of documents Grandpa had sent, and a video file I still hadn't dared to rewatch. In my coat pocket, a cold brass key. Grandpa gave it to me 3 days before he passed. If they make a move, use it. Don't hesitate. I stood before the McConnell estate gate, the house I'd grown up in, and the same house I was cut out of when I was 24. The windows were still spotless, the porch light still glowed against the bronze nameplate that read the McConnells. It was all suffocatingly perfect. The door didn't open to a butler, it opened to my mother. Karen. She wasn't surprised. No smile, no greeting. Just a once-over, quick and sharp like a blade. So, you really came back, she said, her voice light, like I'd only been gone a few days. I nodded. Grandpa wanted me here for the will reading. She stepped aside, didn't invite me in, didn't stop me either. I crossed the threshold, feeling like I was stepping into my own past, every memory, every time I was called the family's failed shadow. Every pitiful glance when I chose to become a volunteer doctor instead of the next McConnell candidate. In the living room, my brother Brandon was on the sofa, earbuds in. He looked up when he saw me, a flicker of surprise, then turned away like I was just a passing breeze. Since my internal erasure, Brandon had cut all ties. At exactly 9 a.m., I arrived at Edelman and Hart, attorneys at law. A high-ceilinged room, mahogany-paneled walls, chandelier light spilling over the long glass table. Lawyer Edelman, who'd served our family for nearly 3 decades, stood to greet each person. My mother, Brandon, Aunt Fiona from Georgia, and me. No one sat beside me. That was fine. The will reading began. Edelman opened the file, his voice steady and clear, not a hint of emotion. The final will and testament of Mr. Felix McConnell, signed the 14th of September of last year. It started with the familiar, charitable donations, a scholarship fund for med students, a portion of assets directed to a coastal conservation trust. My mother nodded slightly, the usual virtue optics she'd come to expect. Then came the part everyone was waiting for. Edelman read slowly. All of Mr. Felix McConnell's shares in Genwright Biotech, including 47% voting rights, valued at approximately $54 million, shall be transferred to Dr. Ivy McConnell. Silence. The real estate holdings, including the lakefront villa in Vermont, the New York penthouse, and the Wyoming ranch, are also transferred in full to Dr. Ivy McConnell. I didn't look at my mother. Edelman lowered his eyes to the final section. The account holding $28 million USD at Privis International Bank, account number 0274, also belongs to Dr. Ivy McConnell. Brandon swallowed hard. Aunt Fiona opened her mouth but said nothing. Edelman closed the folder. That concludes the official contents of the will. I hadn't even taken a full breath before my mother shot to her feet. Absolutely not. She stormed forward, yanking the property confirmation copy from Edelman's hand, her eyes red, hands trembling. She's dead. She died in Uganda malaria. She has no claim to anything. I stood, voice steady. I never died, Mother. She stared straight at me. And then in front of everyone, she ripped the paper in two. No one inherits anything. You don't exist anymore, Ivy. I didn't react. I just stood there, calm, like I'd seen this moment before. Because I had. My hand slipped into my coat pocket, gripping the USB drive with the old metal tag. Only use if they strike first. Grandpa's words echoed louder than ever in my mind. Legacy isn't on paper, it's in what you're willing to do to protect the truth. I looked at my mother. And I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because the real battle had only just begun. I left the Edelman and Hart office with slow, steady steps. The midday wind rustled through the trees, whispering like a voice I no longer recognized. Behind me, my mother's voice echoed through the wooden doors. I'll sue. No one has the right to defraud me. I didn't turn around. No need. I had what I came for, not my family's approval, but the truth. And the truth was right here in the palm of my hand, in the form of a small USB drive with a red tag engraved with a 7-pointed star, the symbol Grandpa used in his old cipher journals. I didn't return to the McConnell estate. I caught a ride to the temporary apartment of Beatrice Knox, my best friend from med school, now a legal advisor for victims of illegal asset seizure. She was waiting for me with 2 cups of coffee and the look of someone ready to go to war with an entire cabinet. Well? She asked, handing me a cup. I gave her the short version. Beatrice's eyes darkened. She tore it? With her own hands. I popped the USB open and placed it on the mahogany table. But Grandpa prepared for that, and so did I. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. What's on it? I plugged the USB into the laptop. No password. Just a single folder named Legacy Package. Inside, 3 files, 1 video, 1 PDF document, and 1 notarized scan. I opened the video first. Grandpa appeared on screen, sitting in the glass-walled study of the Vermont villa, the same room where I used to read with him as a child. He wore a gray cardigan, looking older but still sharp-eyed as ever. If you're watching this, Ivy, he said, voice deep and measured, it means your mother did exactly what I predicted. But don't be afraid. They can burn paper, but not purpose. What you're holding is the real will. Notarized, internationally validated, and delivered through a mirrored system. I swallowed hard as he held up a document with a red seal identical to the one Edelman read, except for one detail. The lower left corner carried the official stamp of the Geneva Office of International Law. I've placed all assets into a trust only you can unlock. You're the sole biometric validator. And anyone who tries to impersonate you. He paused, looking straight into the camera. You're the only one I trust. Not because you carry the McConnell name, but because you never traded humanity for power. I looked at Beatrice. She'd already opened the PDF and was frowning. This is the actual asset transfer list, she said. Genrite shares, real estate, bank accounts, even the humanitarian foundation he set up in Zurich, all in your name. Transferred legally 3 weeks before he died. I clenched my fists. There's more, Beatrice said, scrolling to the final page. He wrote clearly. If any family member attempts to manipulate, threaten, or deny the heir's identity, the entire system will trigger an automatic legal complaint. And copies will be sent to 3 entities: the U.S. Financial Oversight Committee, the Global Heritage Protection Organization, and the media. I didn't know whether to laugh or tremble. Because my grandfather, the man everyone assumed was just a kind, frail scholar, had orchestrated a legal storm no one could undo. Beatrice turned to me, eyes serious. We have the upper hand. But Ivy, if your mother went so far as to have you legally declared dead, she won't stop now. You need to protect yourself, legally and personally. I nodded. I know, but first, I need to confirm something. I went to the file cabinet in the corner and pulled out an envelope Grandpa had mailed me before he died. Inside was a scanned copy of a death certificate, mine. Issued by the South Carolina Department of Health. No signature from me. No confirmation from the hospital I worked at in Uganda. Just one name I never expected, listed under certifying party. Dr. Charlotte Amison, my mother's private physician. The same woman who once said I suffered from post-war trauma-induced delusions. I gripped the document tightly. We need to find her, I told Beatrice. If someone signed off on my death, then they're going to explain every word in court. Beatrice nodded, eyes sharp as glass. We start tomorrow. Tonight, I'm sending legal warning letters to every party involved, and if Karen McConnell wants a war, she's getting one. This warning's. I stood and looked out the window, where Charleston was slowly sinking into nightfall. The first night of the battle to reclaim my name. Not for revenge, but to be seen clearly, legally, and beyond denial. And when the light returns, I won't be anyone's shadow ever again. I arrived at Dr. Charlotte Amison's clinic the very next morning. It was located in a converted old estate, white-painted facade, with a brass sign by the door. Charlotte Amison, Maryland. Mental health care, post-trauma reintegration. I didn't need an appointment. When someone signs your death certificate without asking, you earn the right to knock unannounced. The door opened. A middle-aged nurse looked up from the front desk. Do you have an appointment? My name is Ivy McConnell. I'm here to meet the person who declared me dead. She froze. One moment. Less than a minute later, the inner door swung open and Charlotte appeared. She looked exactly the same as 5 years ago, platinum hair in a neat bun, crisp white coat, and pale gray eyes filled with judgment wrapped in kindness. Oh, Ivy. She smiled as if we'd just bumped into each other at a tea party. I didn't expect to see you so soon. Because you thought I was dead. The smile on her lips faltered for just a second. Come into my office. We should speak privately. I stepped inside. The room was quiet, filled with the artificial scent of lavender like a mask trying too hard. You signed my death certificate, I said the moment the door clicked shut. I want to know why. Charlotte sighed and walked toward her desk. Ivy. When your mother came to me, she was distraught. She said you'd gone missing in Uganda, hadn't been heard from in over 3 months, no embassy confirmation. They received an email from a colleague of yours, saying you died of acute malaria. Your mother needed a medical statement to proceed with the legal formalities. I braced both hands on her desk. And you just signed it? No paperwork, no confirmation from the Ugandan Ministry of Health? You didn't even ask me? Charlotte lowered her gaze. I was wrong. But I trusted your mother. She said you had a history of trauma, behavioral instability, that maybe you'd wandered off or lost control. She said she just wanted to protect the family's legacy from chaos. I went still. You thought I was so unstable I might fake being alive. Charlotte said nothing. I pulled a copy of the death certificate from my bag. I filed to reopen the case, and I have a video from my grandfather clearly stating who holds legal authority. I stepped closer. You're going to court. Not because I want revenge, but because people like you don't get to decide who lives and who doesn't. Charlotte opened her mouth to speak, then paused. Her face twisted into something between fear and regret. I have the original in my safe, she whispered. I never submitted it to the state system. Your mother pressured me for just a scan to get ahead of things. I nodded. Good, submit it. Along with a sworn statement saying you were coerced into signing. My attorney needs it. Charlotte stayed silent for a beat, then gave a soft nod. I will. I'm sorry. I didn't answer. I walked out of the clinic into the open air, where the March breeze carried salt from the Ashley River. Beatrice was waiting for me in the car, reading documents off her laptop. New development, she said. Karen filed for an emergency court order to freeze all inherited assets, citing the heir as mentally unstable and a danger to the estate. I laughed. She moves fast. Then, and stupidly, Beatrice replied. Because I just sent your grandfather's real will, the full video, to a group of investigative journalists and an ethics oversight committee. By tomorrow, this story blows wide open. I leaned back in the seat. Good. Let my mother realize that when she faked my death, she also built a trap for herself. Beatrice glanced over. Ivy, are you sure you want to see this through? After this, your family won't be family anymore. On. I looked out the window, where the sky was growing darker and young leaves trembled in the wind. They stopped being family the day they signed off on my death. I turned back, voice steady. Now, I'm just reclaiming what should never have been stolen. Beatrice nodded. Then let's begin. Next up is the financial record and evidence they funneled assets under other names. I clenched my fists, but inside, I felt nothing but calm. Not rage. Not hatred. Just focus. I had died on paper. Now I would live again by name, by truth. And no one would erase me again. We didn't even have time to breathe. The next morning, when the first headline hit the local news, humanitarian Dr. Ivy McConnell declared dead by family in $82 million inheritance scheme. The public backlash exploded almost instantly. Beatrice gave a dry laugh as she read the comments. This hasn't even made it to court yet, and the internet's already lost its mind. She set her phone on the table. This is when Karen makes her next move. Aller. And sure enough, within the hour, Beatrice received a copy of an email sent from the law firm representing my mother. Subject line, request to verify assets in dispute. Attached was a list of temporary asset transfers from my grandfather's accounts, including a $10 million transfer to a Florida shell company called Blue Bay Consolidated, legally owned by Brandon McConnell. $3 million restructured as minor equity in a charitable trust controlled entirely by Karen McConnell. And the most shocking, $22 million in holding at an international bank in the Cayman Islands, under the name of a third party, Allison Gray. A name that had never appeared in any prior documentation. I stared at Beatrice, my pulse pounding. Who is Allison Gray? Beatrice typed quickly, her face darkening. She's been your mom's financial secretary for nearly 15 years. Holds dozens of assets under her name, properties, stocks, funds. The kind of person who doesn't exist publicly, but is always behind the dirty deals. I went still. They're trying to vanish the estate before the court can step in. Exactly. They're creating a conflict of interest delay long enough to strip everything out of your grandfather's name. Beatrice pulled up a financial connection map. Arrows flew between Charleston, Florida, the Cayman Islands, and back to a trust in Nevada where asset secrecy laws are so strict, even the sender's name can legally be hidden. I exhaled. Can we stop it? We can, Beatrice said, but we need direct evidence that your mother orchestrated this, not just signed papers, but built the system herself to move the money. And luckily, we just got a gift from above. She opened a new email from an anonymous address. The first line read, I used to work as an internal audit assistant for Genwright. I know what they did. Attached was a 6-month transaction log from the final stretch of my grandfather's life, complete with flagged wire transfers, each marked with notes like urgent, legacy diversion, or internal restructuring. One handwritten note made my blood run cold. Move inheritance to isolated trust, prevent Ivy from full access. Beatrice narrowed her eyes. This one's handwritten, not typed. And it's dated the exact day your mother came to talk to me. I wasn't shocked. Just stung. So she never meant to give me a chance. She was planning this, even before Grandpa passed. Beatrice nodded. And she slipped up by letting her own people copy everything. Now we validate it legally and file for an emergency injunction. She hit print and handed me a new folder. You'll have to deliver this to federal civil court yourself. This case is beyond family court now. Because at this point, this is federal financial fraud. I nodded. I'll go now. On the way to court, I got an anonymous text. They're scrubbing records. Someone broke into the accounting office last night. Bring the USB. Be careful. I read it 3 times. The wind outside slammed against the car windows. I wasn't afraid. But I understood this wasn't just a fight over inheritance anymore. This was a full-blown erasure campaign, not just of assets, but of my legal identity, my records, my very existence. We arrived at the courthouse just in time. Beatrice was already there, documents in hand. She filed the emergency motion requesting a temporary freeze on all accounts under or linked to McConnell Holdings, a ban on international asset transfers, an investigation into fraudulent financial activity by the respondent's agents. The judge accepted and ruled the same day. All assets would be frozen for 48 hours pending further investigation. I finally exhaled, but Beatrice gripped my arm. This is the calm before the storm. Go home, lock down every original document, and if you've got anything stored elsewhere, give it all to me, because after this move, Karen won't hold back. I nodded. I'm not expecting her to. There's only one thing I hoped for. That by the time the truth came out, no one could turn away and say, I didn't know. Because from this moment forward, the truth would burn too bright to ever be buried again. I got back to the rented apartment just before midnight. No lights, no curtains drawn. In the dark, I slipped off my shoes, hung up my coat, and sat down on the cold tile floor. I'd been running all day. Running between notary offices, banks, courthouses. Running between versions of the truth, the one I remembered, and the one they were trying to twist. On the table sat a small wooden box Grandpa had mailed me from Vermont a year ago, on my 30th birthday. I'd been in Uganda at the time, and I'd only opened it once. Inside were a handwritten letter, a key with no label, and an old photograph of me and Grandpa, when I was 4, reading together in his glass house. I picked up the letter again. Ivy, if the time comes when they don't just want the money, but want to erase you completely, remember this. The one who's rejected isn't weak, they're the one others fear. I held the key in my hand, flipping it over. A small symbol was etched into the metal. Me, 11B. I frowned. 11B. Suddenly it hit me. ME stood for McConnell Enterprises, a shell company Grandpa had created back when he worked on the Federal Biological Research Council. And 11B, not an apartment number, but a storage unit code. I texted Beatrice immediately. Need to check if McConnell Enterprises still holds assets in any storage vault. Urgent. Less than 10 minutes later, she called back. There's a unit listed under Language Vault, north of Charleston. No public client list. But old accounting records show recurring charges labeled Maintenance, Unit 11B, Language, for the past 12 years. I stood up. I need to go there. Beatrice hesitated. Alone? I've got the key. I held it up, feeling its weight. If this is where he kept the rest of the truth, I'm not waiting another second. He arrived at Language Vault at 8 a.m. and no sign, no pricing board. Just a gray concrete building tucked inside an old industrial zone. Inside was a double-layered security system, biometric scanners, and unmarked cameras. The gatekeeper eyed me suspiciously. Name? Ivy McConnell. I have code 11B. He typed, scanned my ID. The system ran for a moment, then a green light clicked on. You're authorized. He handed me a keycard. Third corridor on the left, self-service, no assistance provided. I walked through the freezing hallway, every step echoing my own presence. At the door marked 11B, I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. Click. The door opened. Inside was a small, windowless room. Nothing but a heavy metal chest, an old projector, and stacks of bound documents. On top, a red file folder labeled, to be opened only if the legacy is under attack. I pulled up a chair. Opened the first file. The first page was a notarized transcript from a GenRight board meeting 3 months before Grandpa passed. A line had been circled in red ink. Draft proposal to revoke control from Mr. Felix McConnell in the event of health decline. In the margin, I recognized his handwriting. Karen and Brandon are behind this. Probably started earlier than I realized. I flipped the page. A flowchart detailing shell companies linked to a trust called Flinch, where most of GenRight's shares had been rerouted and legitimized under the guise of humanitarian development investment. Another line had been marked boldly. If Ivy does not confirm inheritance within 90 days of my death, all assets transfer automatically to secondary trustee Karen. A chill ran through me. Beatrice had said timing was their weapon. Now I understood. They didn't need to win immediately, they just needed me to stay quiet long enough for the law to default in their favor. I turned on the projector. The image flickered to life. Grandpa, sitting in his study, light casting half his face in shadow. His voice was low and steady, but clear. If you're watching this, Ivy, it means I couldn't protect you from them. But you can still protect yourself with the proof they tried to bury. I left everything in these files. A second copy has already been sent to your attorney, Beatrice Knox, in case this is destroyed. He paused, then gave a faint, weary smile. Don't lose your name, Ivy. Because they don't just want the money. They want to erase your very existence from this family's history. The screen went black. I sat there for a long time, saying nothing. Finally, I took my phone, photographed every single page of the files, then locked the storage room carefully behind me. When I stepped outside, dawn was breaking. The city was still quiet, but I knew once the sun rose, everything would change. Because for the first time, I didn't just have anger. I had evidence. I had time. I had power. And for the first time in my life, they were the ones who had to run. I stayed up all night. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because I knew exactly what people do when they start to lose control. They speak first. They create their own version of the story. Fill the truth with words that sound believable if you don't know the full picture. And sure enough, at 8 a.m. the next morning, I got a message from Beatrice with a video attached. They just went on live television. I hit play, my hand freezing. Karen sat at a press table in a familiar hotel conference hall, flanked by her two attorneys, one older, with the face of a former politician, the other younger, sharp, and ice-cold. In front of them were microphones, cameras, lights, and a crowd of reporters pushing in with questions. My mother's performing, I muttered. On screen, Karen looked directly into the camera, her voice soft as if she were talking about a troubled child instead of a federal legal conspiracy. I'm heartbroken to see these rumors spreading. Ivy is my daughter. I love her. But everyone knows she's struggled emotionally since returning from Africa. We just want to help her. I felt my hand clench. The next line nearly made me drop my phone. As for Felix's estate, let me be clear, there was no coercion. My father, while beloved, was not of sound mind in his final year. And the fact that he changed his will caused great concern for our family. Ivy, in a time of instability, took advantage of that vulnerability to claim control. A reporter asked, "Do you have evidence Ivy is unfit to manage the estate?" Karen answered without hesitation. "We have medical documentation. And certain events from her past will soon come to light. This isn't about property, it's an intervention to protect Ivy from herself." I turned off the video. Not because I couldn't handle it, but because I'd heard enough. Beatrice was calling. I answered and said, "They're not denying what they did, they're just rewriting the story and turning me into the unstable one. They're playing the sympathy card." "More than that," Beatrice replied, her voice cool and calm. "I just got the notice. They filed with the state medical board to revoke your license, on grounds of ethical and mental incompetence." I closed my eyes. Just 1 second. All right, if they want to ruin my name, we hit back with the truth. End of sec. More than truth, Beatrice said. We hit with proof. And today, we've got a new card to play. I waited for her to go on. The anonymous email sender, the internal accountant, just agreed to come forward. His name is Louis Deering. He's worked in Gen Wright's audit division for over 8 years. He has documentation proving the estate was restructured to prevent direct ownership by the legal heir. That exact phrase appears in 4 audit reports. I nearly shot up in my seat. Will Louis testify? He wants to protect his wife and kids. But if we guarantee his safety and anonymity, he'll give us everything. I took a deep breath. Anything else? Beatrice hesitated. Yes. He said he overheard an internal phone call between Karen and a financial partner. In it, Karen explicitly mentioned forging signatures. I went rigid. Was it recorded? Louis didn't record it, but it was made through Gen Wright's internal phone system. And they archive server data for 180 days. We still have time to request the log if it hasn't been deleted. I stood up, grabbing my coat. I'm meeting Louis. Right now. Beatrice agreed. I'll arrange a secure location. 3 hours later, I walked into a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Charleston. Louis sat in a corner booth, wearing a cap and dark sunglasses, but his face was still etched with nerves and urgency. I used to admire your mother, Louis said as I sat down. She was sharp, decisive. But then, I started seeing odd budget lines. Contracts with no names. Legacy restructuring entries with no traceable tax ID. He slid a small USB stick across the table. I backed up everything I had access to: audit reports, shadow payrolls, holding accounts, and a transcript I reconstructed from memory of a call between Karen and someone named Lionel Drake. He's listed as legal director for a trust in the Cayman Islands. How it? I took the USB like it was the last piece of a collapsing building, still standing. Louis, I said, you're not just helping me. You're helping my grandfather. You're helping justice. He nodded. I know, and if you can't bring this to light, no one will. I left the cafe before sundown. Outside, the April breeze carried a chill from the sea. I paused, looked down at the USB in my hand, then up at the sky. Tomorrow, I'd hand everything over to Judge Kinley, known for her fairness, the one Beatrice said, doesn't tolerate injustice, especially when it comes dressed in designer suits. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to perform. I just needed one person willing to look truth in the face and say, enough. Because I was ready for the final chapter of a war they never imagined I'd survive long enough to end. The Charleston City Courthouse that morning had no reporters waiting, no cameras, no protest signs lining the halls. Just an emergency hearing requested by my attorney, and just as Beatrice predicted, they hadn't expected me to make it this far. I walked into the courtroom holding a thick file, my eyes no longer hesitant. Beatrice walked ahead of me, her hair tied back, dark suit crisp, iPad in hand like a warrior ready to slash with evidence instead of a sword. Across the room was Karen. My mother. She wore black not to mourn Grandpa, but to play the role of the wounded mother. Her face was lightly made up, her eyes glistening with strategic grief. Brandon sat beside her, spine straight, but his fingers never left his phone. Their attorney, Benson York, was a seasoned man with a polished voice and the confidence of decades in litigation. Judge Kinley entered a stern, composed black woman in her 50s. Beatrice once said, if anyone tries to manipulate her with tears, they better go back to acting school. The hearing began. Benson spoke first, as is standard in emergency motion responses. His voice was smooth, describing the situation as a private family dispute over assets and a will that might have been influenced by a mentally unstable party. Mrs. McConnell has long expressed concerns about her daughter's psychological state, Benson said, glancing at me as though reading from a clinical report. This isn't rejection, it's protection. And, in the interest of caution, we request a closed hearing and the suspension of all financial proceedings until Miss Ivy's mental capacity can be formally reassessed. Beatrice didn't react immediately. She simply gave a faint smile. When it was her turn, she stepped forward, opened the file, and laid out the evidence on the table. The original video from my grandfather, notarized. Legal documents verifying the lawful asset transfers, signed before his death. A report from Louis Deering, confirming fraudulent transactions. And, finally, the transcript of a call between Karen McConnell and Lionel Drake, in which Karen explicitly said, as long as her name's off the system, we can treat the rest like she never existed. The room went silent. Benson rose to object, but Judge Kinley raised her hand. Sit down, Mr. York. She turned to me. Miss McConnell, I have one question. Would you consent to an independent psychiatric evaluation, should the court deem it necessary, to confirm your full legal competence? I stood, meeting her gaze. I consent. Anytime. Because I'm not afraid of being evaluated. I'm afraid of being erased by people who think power lets them rewrite the truth. Kinley nodded slowly. Good. I also have an affidavit from Dr. Amison, the physician who originally signed your death certificate. She's now submitted a sworn correction stating your declaration of death was unauthorized. She turned to Karen. Mrs. McConnell, would you like to make a statement? Karen stood. She didn't look at me. She stared at the bench. I did what I believed was necessary to protect the values of our family. My daughter abandoned us. She walked away, and when she came back, all she wanted was destruction. Beatrice rose and cut in. Number she didn't come back to destroy. She came back to protect the piece of truth you tried to bury. Judge Kinley tapped her gavel lightly. That's enough. She picked up the file on the bench, flipping through the pages. A long pause. Then she spoke. Based on the irrefutable evidence presented, I issue the following interim ruling. Miss Ivy McConnell is alive, legally competent, and the sole heir as clearly stated in the valid last will and testament of Mr. Felix McConnell. All asset freeze requests by the defendants are denied. A full trial will proceed in 30 days. Karen didn't move. Brandon lowered his head. Benson York exhaled. And me? I sat upright. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because with that ruling, I had reclaimed my name. As we stepped out of the courtroom, Beatrice turned to me. You know this isn't over, right? I nodded. They've still got cards to play, but now we've got power, records, and time. Beatrice smirked. And a public that's listening. She held up her phone, where dozens of alerts were rolling in from journalists, social media, veterans groups, and even a special request from a documentary producer. I shook my head. I don't need a movie. I just need my name not to be erased anymore. She patted my shoulder. Then let's see what happens when they try to rewrite the script and no one believes them anymore. I stepped down the courthouse stairs. The sun hit my face. No cameras. No microphones. Just me, finally standing tall on my own name earned in blood, tears, and proof no one could deny. Just Ivy McConnell. Alive. And no longer silent. I didn't walk out of that courtroom like a victor. I walked out like someone who had just come back from the dead, not literally, but legally, morally, existentially. They had killed me on paper. And I had just reversed the first cut. But Beatrice was right, this wasn't the end. Just 4 hours after the hearing, I received an anonymous email. They're pushing shares onto the international market. They can't touch Genright's core assets anymore. But there are still subsidiaries companies your grandfather once temporarily controlled. They're trying to sell before your name is fully restored in the system. Beatrice immediately called an emergency meeting in her office, which had once been a third-floor living room but was now covered in legal files, stamp-labeled folders, printers whirring, and a sprawling map of financial networks across the table. I told you, she said, handing me a printout. Karen still has influence over 3 of Genright's subsidiaries. Greenco, Finetech, and Claris Systems. Your grandfather never got the chance to formally reassign control to you before he passed. And now they're being proposed for dissolution by a special group of shareholders. I skimmed the list. One name made my blood run cold. Brandon McConnell. My brother's involved? I asked, voice rough. Beatrice nodded. He holds 7% through an investment trust Karen created under the label of Sustainable Financial Development. They're using him as a proxy to sign off transactions, transferring so-called idle assets into offshore structures. I clenched the paper. They know if I get full access to the financial web, the whole system collapses. So they're trying to vanish before I get legal standing to freeze it all. Beatrice already had a plan. Plan A. We file an emergency report with the SEC for asset dispersal during unresolved estate litigation. I nodded. And Plan B? She smirked. We send the full case to 2 investigative journalists I trust. One's an independent finance expert, took down 3 banking CEOs. The other exposed a fake charity foundation with just a utility bill. I looked at Beatrice, knowing she was preparing a second strike, one not aimed at legal systems, but at public image. You sure you want to go that far? I asked. She placed a hand on the folder and said firmly, Ivy, people like your mother don't fear the law. But they do fear being looked in the eye and called what they are. A traitor to her own family, clinging to power. I paused, then nodded. Then hit both. Plan A and Plan B. That same day, Beatrice sent out both dossiers, one to the SEC, the other to the 2 journalists. She named the file, The McConnell Structure. When Family Turns Corporate. At the same time, I reached out to Louis, the internal auditor who had first come forward, and asked, Do you know what else they're hiding? Louis went silent for a while. Then he texted back. There's an account. It's not under any family name. But it links directly to a legacy code associated with your grandfather. I'll send you the internal bank email they used to forge the transfer records. A few hours later, I received this email address. Faltdata@silvershoreintel.com. It belonged to a bank in Malta long known as a quiet harbor for assets meant to disappear temporarily. Beatrice nearly jumped from her chair. If we can prove Karen or Brandon accessed this account, this isn't just financial fraud. This is money laundering and abuse of fiduciary authority. That's a federal felony. Immediately, she drafted an urgent request to the Maltese bank and invoked international financial cooperation law. It may take a few days, she said. But when it arrives, it could be the final blow. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the air in the room thicken like the stillness before a storm. Beatriz turned to me. Ivy, they're getting desperate, and when powerful people get desperate, they get dangerous. I nodded. I know. She frowned. If they can't beat you in court, they'll get dirty. They'll rewrite the story. Drag up old wounds. Twist your image into some vindictive avenger. I didn't blink. Then I'll show them what righteous vengeance actually looks like. That night, I wrote a letter by hand, the first one since I was legally declared dead. I pinned it to the message board inside the Greaves Foundation office, right beside a photo of Grandpa and me reading together in the golden sunlight. We don't choose where we're born, but we choose where we rise when everyone believes we've already fallen. Tomorrow would be the day I released everything to the public. Not for victory, but because no one has the right to bend the truth and walk away pretending to be the victim. Not anymore. Not while I'm still alive. And finally, coming back in full name intact. That morning, as I poured my first cup of coffee in my temporary apartment, the world had already changed. My phone blew up: messages, emails, notifications. News was spreading like someone had detonated a bomb in the middle of the financial district. 2 articles dropped simultaneously, one in the Integrity Ledger, the other in Finance Reel. Both carried the same headline: Declared dead by her own family for $82 million, the unstoppable rise of Ivy McConnell. The first article came from journalist Clara Wynne, known for exposing a politician who funneled disaster relief funds into his re-election campaign. Clara wrote sharp and clean, every word had teeth. Ivy McConnell, a humanitarian doctor who served in Uganda and Kenya, has legally reclaimed her identity after being unlawfully declared dead by her own mother and brother. The motive? To steal an $82 million inheritance from her grandfather, founder of Genwright Corporation. Arno. Below the headline was a still from my grandfather's will video. Him seated in the sunlight, eyes unwavering, clearly stating I was the one he trusted. The second article, written by financial reporter Lane Morrow, cut even deeper. Through a network of shell companies and offshore transactions, Karen McConnell and her son Brandon are suspected of laundering tens of millions into foreign accounts, including in Malta and the Caymans. Internal documentation and recorded conversations suggest at least 3 actions that may qualify as federal financial fraud. Beatriz called me at 9:17 a.m., her voice no longer calm. It buzzed with the energy of someone holding back an earthquake. They're crumbling, Ivy. I just got word from the Malta bank the Shadow Finch Holdings account has been frozen under an emergency directive from the European Anti-Money Laundering Commission. And Brandon's name is on the authorization. How are? I couldn't speak for several seconds. We did it, Beatriz said softly. Not just legally, we cracked the mask they've worn in public for years. I sat down, feeling the weight I'd carried for months finally shift, even if just slightly. But I knew Karen McConnell wouldn't go down without a fight. And I was right. 2 hours later, a press release hit Twitter, X, and business forums, sent from her attorney's office. The McConnell family denies all allegations of financial misconduct and asserts that these attacks are a personal vendetta by a daughter who suffered significant psychological instability after time abroad. Attached was a deliberately leaked medical file, a note from a doctor I once worked with in Nairobi, stating I had shown signs of neurological exhaustion and acute insomnia. I went still. That was the year I nearly died from exhaustion during a cholera outbreak in Kenya. That doctor cared for me after I collapsed on the operating table after 72 hours of nonstop work. And now they were twisting it into evidence of mental instability. Beatriz messaged me instantly. Do not respond. Let me handle this. She contacted legal counsel from the international medical organization I once worked with. 2 hours later, they released a formal statement. Dr. Ivy McConnell served under extreme humanitarian conditions with unmatched professionalism and dedication. Any quotes from internal reports used to smear her name are misleading, selectively edited, and a gross violation of personal privacy. I exhaled but barely had a moment to breathe before my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. Ivy. A deep male voice said slowly. This is Nash Wilder. I'm an independent journalist following the McConnell case. I have something you need to see. A former GenRight employee, your grandfather's personal assistant, just came forward. She says there's one last recording from him, a video no one's ever seen. I sat up straight. Can you send it? No, Nash replied. You need to see it in person, and if it's what I think it is, this could be the end for Karen. I agreed. We arranged to meet at a small studio in North Charleston. I brought Beatriz and a portable hard drive to secure the data. Nash met us with a grin, the kind of smile that says, I'm holding a nuclear weapon in my back pocket. This video was recorded 2 weeks before your grandfather passed, he explained, plugging the drive into the monitor. It was never sent. The assistant got reassigned suddenly, and she's been too afraid to release it, until now. The screen lit up. My grandfather sat in his favorite mahogany chair, sunlight filtering through the curtains. His face was worn, but his eyes were sharp. Karen, he began. If you're watching this, then it means you've gone as far as I once prayed you never would. But I wasn't wrong. He paused, looked directly into the camera. Ivy is the only one in this family who values honor above money. If you try to erase her name, steal the estate, use power to bury truth, you are not just going against my wishes. You are betraying the very legacy I built with my hands and mind. A faint smile touched the corner of his lips. And I planned for this. Because if they ever tried to burn down what I left behind, I wanted proof that could rise from the ashes. The screen went black. The room was silent. Beatriz turned to me. This is it. The backbone of the entire case. I nodded, eyes locked on the black screen. We'll release it, I said. At the right moment. Not too soon, not too late. Just when it traps her with no way out. Now, because with every layer of truth revealed, Karen McConnell no longer looked like a grieving mother, but a woman willing to fake her daughter's death to steal a crown of power. And I, the one they thought they'd buried, had returned to end it. Not with fire, but with evidence. And the light of a truth no one will ever be able to extinguish again. 3 days later, my grandfather's final video aired live on Face the Nation during primetime Sunday evening. I wasn't the one who released it. That decision came from Nash Wilder, the journalist who promised, I won't tell the story their way, I'll tell it the way it happened. Backstage at the studio, just minutes before the segment aired, Beatriz turned to me and said, You don't have to say a word, just stand there, because this time, the world will speak for you. Oh. The program opened with a summary of the saga. The McConnell inheritance dispute, the $82 million estate, the unlawful declaration of death, followed by a breakdown of the frozen fraudulent transactions. Then, without warning, Nash turned to the camera and said, We've just received a previously unreleased video, recorded by Felix McConnell, founder of GenRight. This was never meant for the press, not for the courts, but for his daughter, and for anyone who believes honor cannot be bought. He pressed play. The screen lit up with my grandfather, older, but with eyes sharp as forged steel. His voice rang out, steady and clear. I leave my estate to Ivy, not because she's my blood, but because she's the only one who didn't lie to me. Karen, if you're watching this, you've gone too far. You tried to erase Ivy just to keep a name you no longer deserve. The studio was silent. You can cut paper, burn wills, drain bank accounts, but you cannot burn memory. You cannot erase trust. Ivy, if you're listening, don't be afraid. I've never feared anyone with power because power does not define truth. The screen faded to black. 1 second of absolute silence. And then, the internet exploded. Live commentary surged across every platform like a tidal wave. The hashtag number, Justice for Ivy, shot to national trending #1 in just 17 minutes. Prominent accounts from finance, humanitarian aid, medicine, and politics all shared the video. Beatriz didn't smile, but I saw her hand tighten into a small, silent fist. That was the knockout, she said. From the mouth they tried hardest to silence. I walked out of the studio without saying a word. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't need to say anything anymore. Because in the next 24 hours, everything collapsed like dominoes. Brandon McConnell was urgently summoned for questioning over 3 offshore accounts held under false names. Attorney Benson York announced his withdrawal from the case, citing personal ethical conflict. Karen McConnell, once a state senator, once nicknamed the Community Warrior, now faced formal charges for money laundering, document forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, and even the false declaration of a living person's death. And me? I received an invitation to speak at an international conference on inheritance rights and legal identity. A woman from Nairobi messaged me. We still remember Dr. Ivy, the one who ran 5 kilometers through mud to save a nameless child. I didn't need $82 million to be someone. I just needed my name back. And this time, people didn't just remember me as a victim. They remembered me as the one who stood up. Not to get revenge, but to put a stop to an entire generation who believed power was a license to steal someone else's voice. Beatrice walked into my office, tossing a folder onto my desk. The court just scheduled the criminal trial. Karen will face the judge within 45 days. I didn't ask anything. I just nodded and signed the final supplemental declaration. I, Ivy McConnell, affirm my identity, rightful ownership, and duty to protect the legacy of my grandfather in both assets and values. R4. In a world where a person's death can be fabricated with just a forged document, I am living proof that truth, even late, always finds its way back. I never thought I'd find myself walking into the visitation room at the Charleston Detention Center, not as a humanitarian doctor, not as a witness, but as the daughter of the accused. Karen McConnell was being held in a segregated unit, awaiting trial on more than 9 charges from document forgery to international money laundering. But today, she'd requested to see me. Beatrice asked me 3 times, "Are you sure?" I nodded. Not because I thought I owed her a goodbye, but because I needed to look directly at the woman who tried to erase me not just through paperwork, but through words, reputation, and motherhood. The visitation room was cold, thick with the smell of disinfectant. Karen sat behind the glass, dressed in an orange jumpsuit that made her look a decade older. But her eyes, those were unchanged. Sharp as a blade. Cold as steel. I picked up the phone. She did the same, after a brief hesitation. "You came," she said first. I said nothing. "I didn't think you'd really take it this far," she went on, part mocking, part bitter. I met her eyes. "And you thought I'd really die, didn't you? Or, at the very least, stay silent for the rest of my life." She didn't deny it, just stayed quiet. The kind of silence I'd known since childhood. I leaned back. "You never wanted the legacy. You wanted the power to rewrite the story, the family story, and the part where my name appeared in it." "Oh well." Karen narrowed her eyes. "Legacy belongs to survivors, Ivy. I survived by not believing in things like morality. And I don't apologize for that." I smiled. "No one's asking you to, but you're going to pay for it." "I used to think I was protecting you," she said suddenly. "When you turned down the development director role, refused to marry into the Whitman family. I knew then you weren't on our side." I replied calmly, "I was never on your side. You built a family like it was a corporation. And I was just the failed investment." Her eyes flickered, maybe with regret, maybe I imagined it. But her voice stayed even. "You've won it all back now. The name, the inheritance, public sympathy. They'll turn you into a hero. And eventually, they'll forget you. Just like they forgot me." I tilted my head. "You're wrong. They don't pity me. They heard me." And for the first time, no one silenced that voice with a last name or a title. "Ivy's." I was about to hang up when she spoke again, softer this time. "There's another account, in your name. He opened it for you when you turned 18. I never touched it, but Brandon might know about it." I froze. She looked at me for the first time, not as a manipulator, but as a woman worn out by her own choices. "I went too far, but if you really want to keep everything, check from the beginning." I gave a slight nod. Not out of gratitude, but because, finally, she'd put the weapon down. I stood. "I'll check. But I won't forgive. Forgiveness is a privilege, and you gave that up a long time ago." Karen didn't argue. She just watched me walk away like she'd finally lost the one thing she could never control. A daughter who no longer needed her approval to exist. In the parking lot, I pulled out my phone and called Beatrice. "I need you to look into an account Felix may have opened in my name when I was 18. It might be outside the will." She answered instantly. "I had a feeling. I'll use your new legal authority and trace it through his personal gift ledger." I hung up and exhaled, feeling like I'd just found a piece of broken bone I never knew was missing. I didn't go back to the jail. I didn't look back. Because I knew. The woman who had once been my mother had died a long time ago. What remained was just the shell of someone who traded everything to preserve a title. As for me, I was no longer the shadow named Ivy. I was me. And my story was about to end by the hand of the very woman they once thought they had buried for good. A week after my final meeting with Karen, Beatrice called me at midnight. Not a text. Not an email. A video call, something she never did unless it was serious. I answered, my eyes still burning from lack of sleep. She was beaming a smile I hadn't seen since the day we filed the first lawsuit. "We found it," she said. "An escrow account, disguised as a personal scholarship fund. The ID matches your birth certificate. It was set up the year you turned 18. And guess what the current value is?" I sat up straight. "How much?" She held up 3 fingers. $36 million. US dollars. I froze. She continued, "It's never been touched, no withdrawals. And the original custodian listed was Felix McConnell himself. With one condition. Only to be released to Ivy if she keeps the McConnell name throughout adulthood and refuses to erase herself to please anyone else." Others friv. I nearly broke down, not because of the money, but because of the message he left behind. A moral code. A quiet vow that matched the life I'd chosen. To live truthfully, even if it meant being rejected. I whispered, barely audible. "You prepared for everything. Even when I didn't know where I was headed." 3 days later, I walked into the financial firm holding the account. On a cold, rainy afternoon, I signed the papers granting me access. The overhead lights shimmered off the glass and marble, as if the world itself was pausing to reflect. The manager led me to a secure vault. Not for cash, but because Felix had left a sealed brown envelope. Red wax held it shut. Inside were 4 things. 1. A photo of me at age 8, wearing a helmet, learning to ride a bike with him. 2. A folded scrap of paper with messy handwriting. "When they push you off the track, build your own road." San. The only surviving sketch of Jen Wright's original headquarters, labeled Ivy's Concept. 4. And a small steel necklace with a round pendant engraved with 4 words. "Be louder than silence." That's when the tears came. Not because he left me a fortune, but because he left proof that I was never forgotten. The following month, the official trial began. Karen pled guilty to 3 of the 9 charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. Brandon lost all ownership rights and was banned from financial activity for 10 years. As for me, after testifying, I was granted full control of the original inheritance, along with secondary assets connected to affiliated trusts. But I didn't keep it all. Part went into launching the Felix Fund, offering scholarships to students abandoned by their families for not following the right path. Another portion was donated to community projects across Africa, where I once served. And me? I moved to a small house on the outskirts of Vermont where the red maple tree my grandfather planted still stood. I still worked. But not as the doctor rushing across continents. Now I help rewrite stories. Starting with my own. On the first snowy day of winter, a package arrived at my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a worn leather journal and a handwritten card. For anyone who's ever been written out of their own story. You don't need permission to return. I pressed the journal to my chest. Stood by the window, watching snow drift past the porch. I don't need a happy ending. I need a beginning where I'm no longer a ghost in someone else's will. Where my name is spoken. Without asking for approval. My name is Ivy McConnell. I'm alive. I remember. And this time, I'm writing the story myself.